Did you know that since World War II, the number of countries in the world has nearly quadrupled? Yet today, creating a new nation has become almost impossible, leaving dozens of separatist movements in political limbo. In this documentary, we'll take you inside 5 of the world's most significant independence movements. You'll meet people like Elena, a schoolteacher in Transnistria, a place that exists on maps but is recognized by no UN member state. Through intimate portraits and geopolitical analysis, you'll discover why the quest for self-determination remains such a potent force, with communities willing to risk everything for the promise of sovereignty and identity. The failed dream, Catalonia's independence movement. What if the scenes of police violence and determination we witnessed in 2017 had led to a different outcome for Catalonia? The images shocked the world. Spanish riot police dragging elderly voters away from polling stations, confiscating ballot boxes, and firing rubber bullets into crowds of peaceful protesters. October 1, 2017 was supposed to be the day Catalonia voted on its future. Instead, it became a flashpoint in one of Europe's most significant constitutional crises of the 21st century. The Catalan government, led by President Carles Puigdemont, organized this independence referendum despite Spain's constitutional court ruling it illegal. Polling stations opened early that Sunday morning as volunteers worked to protect ballot boxes from seizure. By day's end, regional health officials reported nearly 900 people injured in clashes with police. The Spanish government's heavy-handed response transformed what might have been a contested vote into a powerful symbol of resistance for many Catalans. When the votes were tallied, the results showed 90% in favor of independence, but with a critical caveat. Turnout reached only 43% of eligible voters. Many referendum opponents had followed the Spanish government's advice to boycott what they considered an illegal process. This created competing narratives. Independent supporters saw a clear mandate for separation, while opponents viewed it as an illegitimate process lacking proper democratic foundations. The roots of this modern independence movement stretch back decades, but found fertile ground during the 2012 Eurozone crisis. As Spain's economy contracted by over 8% and unemployment soared past 25%, Catalonia, Spain's wealthiest region, increasingly questioned Madrid's policies. Independence transformed from a cultural aspiration into what many saw as an economic necessity. Barcelona attorney Maria Puig experienced this shift firsthand. Before 2012, independence was a fringe issue discussed mainly by cultural nationalists, she explains. After the economic crisis, suddenly my friends in banking, technology, even medicine began seeing independence as a practical solution to our economic problems. The perception that we send more money to Madrid than we receive became a powerful rallying cry. Around her, Barcelona's streets filled with protesters waving the red and yellow striped Estelada flags, the once occasional symbol now appearing on balconies throughout the city. This economic discontent found political expression through massive demonstrations. On September 11, 2012, Catalonia's National Day, over 1 million people marched through Barcelona demanding independence. Similar demonstrations occurred annually, culminating in the 2017 referendum. 10 days after the referendum, President Puigdemont delivered a speech that initially confused both sides. He declared independence but immediately suspended its implementation, calling for dialogue with Madrid. This ambiguous position satisfied neither independent supporters who wanted immediate action, nor Madrid officials who demanded complete abandonment of separation plans. The standoff continued until October 27th, when the Catalan parliament formally declared independence. Spain responded swiftly. The next day, Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy invoked Article 155 of the Spanish Constitution, suspending Catalonia's autonomy and dismissing its government. Puigdemont and several ministers fled to Belgium to avoid arrest, while others remained and were imprisoned on charges of sedition and misuse of public funds. For many independent supporters, these events, especially the imprisonment of elected officials, reinforced their conviction that Spain was unwilling to respect Catalan democratic processes. When our leaders were jailed for organizing a vote, it confirmed what many of us suspected, that Spain doesn't see Catalans as equals with the right to determine our future, says Jordi Sol, a pro-independence activist from Girona. Yet in the years that followed, enthusiasm for separation gradually waned. A poll from the Catalan government's own Centre d'Estudis d'Opinió showed support for independence declined from 49% in 2017 to 42% by early 2024, despite continued imprisonment of independence leaders until 2021, when the Spanish government issued pardons. Several factors contributed to this decline. The economic impact of political instability proved severe, with more than 7,000 companies relocating their legal headquarters outside Catalonia after the 2017 crisis, including major banks and corporations. While many maintained operations in the region, the corporate exodus undermined the economic self-confidence that had fueled the independence movement. Additionally, the pro-independence political coalition fractured. The three main separatist parties, Together for Catalonia, JXCat, Republican Left of Catalonia, ERC, and Popular Unity Candidacy, CUP, increasingly disagreed on strategy. ERC favored dialogue with Madrid, while JXCat maintained a more confrontational approach. These divisions prevented effective governance, even as separatist parties held a parliamentary majority. Perhaps most significantly, the Spanish government changed tactics. After the 2018 no-confidence vote that removed Prime Minister Rajoy, the socialist government under Pedro Sánchez pursued dialogue rather than confrontation. While maintaining opposition to independence, Sánchez offered pardons to imprisoned leaders and engaged with Catalan authorities on regional funding and infrastructure. This approach denied independence supporters the external enemy that had previously united them. The 2024 Catalan elections delivered dramatic evidence of this shift. For the first time since 2010, pro-independence parties lost their parliamentary majority. The Socialist Party, PSC, won the most seats, while pro-independence parties collectively lost 11 seats compared to the previous election. Political analyst Elena Martinez attributes this reversal to voter fatigue. After years of political instability with few concrete results, many Catalans simply want functional government addressing daily concerns like healthcare, education, and transportation. The independence movement promised a new country but couldn't deliver, leading many supporters to reconsider their priorities. But Catalonia isn't alone. Across the globe, regions are fighting for recognition with varying degrees of success. From the frozen conflict zones of Eastern Europe to the constitutional debates of the United Kingdom, separatist movements reflect both universal principles and highly specific local conditions. What drives these movements beyond the headlines? And why do some succeed while others fail? To understand these questions, we need to examine the fundamental forces driving separation movements worldwide. The language of identity. How culture drives separation. Why would someone risk everything, economic stability, personal safety, even freedom, for the right to govern themselves? This question lies at the heart of understanding separatist movements worldwide. While politics and economics certainly matter, something deeper often drives these movements. Cultural identity. Cultural identity encompasses language, traditions, customs, and shared history that define how people see themselves. For many independence movements, preserving this identity becomes the fundamental motivation that sustains them through decades of struggle. When people feel their culture is threatened, the desire for political autonomy often follows as a protective measure. In Quebec, Canada's predominantly French-speaking province, the sovereignty movement has ebbed and flowed for generations. Surveys reveal that 72% of Quebec sovereigntists feel strongly attached to their province, compared to 44% of Quebec residents overall. This attachment to place and identity forms the emotional foundation for separatism that persists despite economic arguments against independence. I speak French, I dream in French, I love in French, explains Montreal resident Marie Tremblay. When I hear politicians in Ottawa discussing policies that affect my daily life in a language I struggle to learn in school, I feel like a foreigner in my own country. This sentiment of cultural alienation within a larger political entity appears consistently across separatist movements worldwide. Modern separatism exists within an increasingly globalized world. As borders become more permeable to commerce, ideas, and people, local identities can feel threatened. Yet simultaneously, globalization provides new platforms for preserving these identities. A Catalan language app developed in Barcelona might be downloaded by diaspora communities worldwide, strengthening cultural bonds even as physical borders remain unchanged. Language serves as the most visible marker of cultural identity and a rallying point for independence movements. In Quebec, 88% of sovereigntists believe the French language faces serious threats, compared to 59% of provincial residents overall. This perception of linguistic vulnerability translates directly into political support for greater autonomy or independence. Wales offers a parallel example, where language revival has accompanied growing nationalist sentiment. The Welsh language, which appeared on the verge of extinction in the mid-20th century with only 20% of Welsh people speaking it, has experienced a remarkable renaissance. Today, the Welsh government aims for 1 million Welsh speakers by 2050, representing nearly a third of the population. This language revival coincides with the growth of Plaid Cymru, the Welsh Nationalist Party, which has increased its representation in the Welsh Parliament. When a language disappears, we lose an entire perspective on reality, explains linguistic anthropologist Carla Bennett. Languages contain cultural knowledge built over generations, relationships with the land, social structures, spiritual beliefs that can't simply be translated. This connection explains why so many independence movements focus on language rights as a first demand. In Catalonia, the right to education in Catalan became a major political issue decades before independence gained mainstream support. Beyond language, cultural celebrations reinforce the distinct identity underpinning separatism. The Eisteddfod in Wales, Basque Festival of Ars Nagusia, and Quebec's St. Jean-Baptiste Day all serve as cultural touchstones that strengthen collective identity. I once witnessed the St. Jean-Baptiste Day celebration in Montreal, where 3 generations of a family sang traditional Quebecois folk songs together, the youngest barely speaking but already absorbing the cultural heritage that might one day inform their political identity. These events transform abstract political concepts into lived experiences that engage all generations. The power of cultural identities manifests in how people describe themselves. In Quebec, 43% of sovereigntists identify as Quebecer only, rather than Canadian or some combination, versus just 17% of provincial residents overall. This exclusive identity, seeing oneself solely as a member of the minority cultural group rather than the larger state, correlates strongly with support for independence. Moving beyond Western democracies, in Myanmar, ethnic minorities like the Karen and Kachin have maintained decades-long independence struggles rooted in cultural differences from the Bama majority. Their resistance movements include extensive cultural preservation programs, from language schools to traditional arts training. Cultural identity creates powerful emotional connections to separatist causes that often override rational economic calculations. When identity feels threatened, cost-benefit analyses become secondary to concerns about cultural survival. This explains why economic arguments against independence often fail to persuade committed separatists. Their motivation stems from values that transcend financial measurements. The digital age has transformed how cultural identities operate within separatist movements. Social media platforms allow minority languages and cultural expressions to flourish outside traditional geographic boundaries. Meanwhile, younger generations often embrace hybrid identities that combine traditional cultural elements with global influences, creating generational divides within these movements. The Basque country illustrates this evolution. With the Euskara language dating back to pre-Roman times, traditional Basque nationalism emphasized cultural distinctiveness. However, younger Basques increasingly embrace a multilingual identity that accommodates Spanish, French, Euskara, and English, challenging older notions based on linguistic purity. For regions seeking independence, cultural awareness must eventually translate into political organization. The most successful separatist movements build institutions that transform cultural identity into political power through media outlets, educational systems, and community organizations that operate parallel to state structures. Cultural identity provides resilience during periods of repression and sustains movements across generations. However, cultural identity alone rarely succeeds without accompanying economic and political strategies. This brings us to a crucial question for any region contemplating independence. Would going it alone make economic sense? Even the strongest cultural identity faces severe challenges without economic viability. For regions considering separation, the economic calculation involves complex trade-offs between sovereignty and prosperity that we'll examine next. The economic gamble. Would independence pay off? What would happen to Catalonia's economy if it had achieved independence in 2017? When President Puigdemont declared independence, financial markets immediately responded. The Spanish stock market dropped 2.45% in a single day. Several of Catalonia's largest companies, including Banco Sabadell and CaixaBank, announced plans to relocate their headquarters outside the region. This immediate economic reaction highlights the central tension in separatist economics, the promise of greater control over resources versus the potential for significant economic disruption. Economic self-determination serves as a powerful motivator for many independence movements. Regions like Catalonia, Scotland, and Flanders in Belgium point to their economic strength relative to their parent countries as justification for independence. These regions often argue that they contribute more in taxes than they receive in public services and investment, creating a sense of economic grievance that fuels separatist sentiment. Catalonia represents Spain's economic powerhouse, generating approximately 20% of Spanish GDP while containing just 16% of the population. The region accounts for 25% of Spain's exports and attracts nearly one-third of all foreign investment in the country. For many Catalans, these figures suggest they would be better off controlling their own economic destiny rather than subsidizing poorer Spanish regions. Barcelona economist Jordi Serra calculates that Catalonia transfers between 8 to 10 billion euros annually to other Spanish regions through tax revenue that exceeds public spending in the region. This creates what we call the fiscal deficit, money that leaves our economy and doesn't return, he explains. Over decades, this accumulates to hundreds of billions of euros that could have funded infrastructure, education, and healthcare in Catalonia. However, independence would create immediate economic challenges that might offset these potential gains. The key economic hurdles include trade disruption. Spain represents the destination for roughly 35% of Catalan exports. An independent Catalonia facing trade barriers or temporary exclusion from the European Union would experience significant export disruption. Scotland faces similar challenges, with 60% of its exports going to the rest of the UK compared to just 19% to the EU. The Scottish government's analysis suggests independence could reduce Scotland's GDP by up to 8.7%. Currency complications. Remaining in the Eurozone would provide stability but require EU member states' agreement, including Spain's. Creating a new currency would offer monetary sovereignty but risk depreciation and financial instability. As Maria Puig, owner of a Barcelona textile business, explains, "My company exports across Europe. Currency uncertainty would devastate our operations. Most of our contracts and loans are in euros. Changing currencies would throw all our financial planning into chaos." Banking system challenges. When independence movements gain momentum, capital flight often follows. After the 2017 referendum, more than 7,000 companies moved their legal headquarters from Catalonia. Banking systems depend on central bank support. Without European Central Bank access, Catalan banks would face higher borrowing costs and potential liquidity challenges. National debt division. Catalonia accounts for approximately 19% of Spanish GDP, but would an independent Catalonia assume a corresponding share of Spain's sovereign debt? Negotiations over debt inheritance often become contentious, as seen during Scotland's independence campaign. Public sector transition. New nations must establish government agencies, regulatory bodies, tax collection systems, and border infrastructure. Scotland's government estimated transition costs at approximately €3.2 billion. Creating these institutions would require significant investment during an economically vulnerable period. Despite these challenges, independence proponents argue that long-term benefits would eventually outweigh short-term disruption. They point to small European nations like Denmark, Finland, and Ireland that have prospered through economic policies tailored to their specific needs. With control over taxation, regulation, and public investment, newly independent regions could potentially create economic environments more conducive to their strengths. Small countries can be more nimble in responding to economic opportunities, argues economic geographer Helena Norberg. Look at how Ireland transformed itself into a technology hub through targeted tax policies and educational investments. Catalonia or Scotland could pursue similar strategies with independence. How do these economic realities affect public support for independence? Polling data reveals that economic concerns significantly influence voters' positions. During Scotland's 2014 referendum campaign, economic issues consistently ranked as voters' top concern. Those who believed Scotland would be economically better off independent were overwhelmingly likely to vote for independence. Similarly, support for Catalan independence correlates strongly with economic perceptions. When asked why they support independence, 51% of pro-independence Catalans cite economic improvement among their primary motivations, according to a 2022 survey by the Centre d'Estudis d'Opinió. Given these complex considerations, many independence movements have moderated their approaches. Rather than immediate full independence, some propose phased transitions that would maintain economic integration while gradually building separate institutions. Others advocate for enhanced autonomy arrangements that would provide greater fiscal control without the disruption of full separation. Scotland's independence movement has developed detailed economic transition plans addressing currency, trade, and financial regulation. These plans acknowledge potential short-term costs while emphasizing long-term benefits. By addressing economic concerns directly, independent supporters hope to convince voters that the transition, while challenging, would ultimately benefit their region. Successful independence would create significant economic disruption for regions like Scotland and Catalonia, requiring complex trade-offs between sovereignty and economic stability. The calculation involves weighing immediate transition costs against potential long-term benefits of self-determination. For regions considering independence, this economic gamble represents perhaps the most consequential aspect of their decision. Beyond economics and culture, many independence movements are fueled by something deeper: historical trauma. Past conflicts, oppression, and broken promises create powerful emotional narratives that drive separatist movements across generations. These historical grievances often prove more durable than economic calculations, sustaining independence movements even through periods of economic uncertainty. The wounds of history, trauma, and unresolved conflicts. How do events from decades or even centuries ago continue to fuel today's separatist movements? In Kurdistan, elderly villagers still recount the 1988 Halabja chemical attack that killed thousands of Kurds. In Taiwan, the February 28, 1947 incident remains a defining moment in the island's relationship with mainland China. These historical traumas form the emotional core of many independence movements worldwide. Historical trauma functions as a powerful driver for separatist movements, creating collective memories that pass from generation to generation. When populations experience violence, oppression, or cultural erasure at the hands of a central government, these experiences create lasting distrust that makes future reconciliation difficult. Unlike economic grievances that might be addressed through policy changes, historical wounds often prove resistant to practical solutions, like scars that never fully heal. My grandmother never trusted the Chinese government after witnessing the 1947 crackdown, explains Taiwanese historian Lin Machen. She passed that suspicion to my mother, who passed it to me. This is personal family history. This intergenerational transmission of historical memory creates continuity in separatist movements even when material conditions improve. The power of historical trauma becomes particularly evident when examining how different groups interpret the same events. In Taiwan, the February 28 incident began when government agents confronted a cigarette vendor in Taipei, triggering protests against the recently arrived Kuomintang administration. The subsequent crackdown killed thousands of Taiwanese civilians and initiated the White Terror period of martial law that lasted until 1987. During this period, an estimated 140,000 Taiwanese were imprisoned and thousands executed for alleged opposition to the government. From Beijing's perspective, however, the incident represents a necessary action to maintain Chinese territorial integrity during the Civil War. Chinese textbooks typically minimize the event or frame it as a minor occurrence in the larger struggle to reunify China. These competing narratives make reconciliation challenging, as they reflect fundamentally different understandings of national identity. Kurdistan presents a complex case of historical grievances spanning multiple countries. The Kurdish people, approximately 30 to 40 million strong across Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Syria, represent one of the world's largest ethnic groups without a state. Their historical trauma includes the 1988 Halabja chemical attack by Saddam Hussein's government that killed an estimated 5,000 Kurdish civilians, the suppression of Kurdish language and culture in Turkey, and broken promises of autonomy dating back to the 1920 Treaty of Sèvres. When Kurdish children learn their forbidden language in secret, they are participating in resistance against historical oppression, explains Kurdish activist Zahra Mohammadi. Our language survived despite systematic attempts to eradicate it. This survival itself becomes a source of identity. Historical narratives maintain power through various transmission mechanisms. Formal education systems play a crucial role, with textbooks reinforcing particular interpretations of events. In Taiwan, educational reforms in the 1990s introduced more Taiwan-centric historical perspectives, contributing to a strengthened Taiwanese identity among younger generations. Cultural expressions preserve historical memories outside formal institutions. Kurdish musicians performing dengbej, traditional historical storytelling through song, keep historical grievances alive even when formal education systems suppress these narratives. These cultural expressions embed historical consciousness in everyday life. For the Youssef family in Iraqi Kurdistan, history lives in their daily conversations. My grandfather lost 17 relatives in Halabja, explains Dylan Youssef, a university student. When I consider our future, I remember his stories about the bodies he found after the chemical attack. How can we trust a government that did this to us? Commemorative rituals and monuments physically embody historical memory. Taiwan's 228 Peace Memorial Park transformed a site of trauma into a space for reflection. Annual commemorations maintain public awareness while acknowledging progress toward democratic governance. Similarly, Kurdistan region established museums documenting the Anfal genocide, ensuring younger generations understand the historical context of Kurdish autonomy struggles. Family oral histories often prove most powerful in transmitting historical trauma. When grandparents share personal experiences of oppression, historical events gain emotional immediacy that textbooks cannot match. These intimate transmissions create personal connections to collective grievances that sustain separatist movements across generations. Digital technology has transformed how historical narratives spread. Social media platforms allow direct sharing of historical documentation and testimonies that might previously have been suppressed. These technologies enable diaspora communities to participate in collective memory formation despite geographical separation from their homelands. Historical trauma creates several political effects that strengthen separatist movements. It establishes clear boundaries between group identities based on different historical experiences. It generates moral legitimacy for political claims when separatists can point to documented historical injustices. And it creates emotional investment in political outcomes that economic incentives cannot easily overcome. The durability of historically based separatist movements becomes evident when comparing them to movements based primarily on economic grievances. Northern Italy's separatist movement, which focuses mainly on economic complaints, has fluctuated significantly with changing economic conditions. In contrast, independence movements grounded in historical trauma, like those in Kurdistan or Taiwan, have maintained remarkable continuity despite varying economic circumstances. Successful reconciliation typically requires acknowledging historical injustices rather than minimizing them. Spain's approach to Catalonia demonstrates the challenges of ignoring historical grievances, as attempts to dismiss Catalan historical narratives have intensified separatist sentiment. Conversely, the UK government's acknowledgement of historical injustices in Scotland has facilitated more productive constitutional discussions. But in today's world, no separatist movement exists in isolation. They all operate within a complex international system. Historical grievances may provide internal motivation for independence movements. But external recognition ultimately determines which regions become countries. What separates successful independence movements from those that remain perpetually stuck in limbo? Why does Kosovo enjoy recognition from over 100 countries while Somaliland, despite maintaining stability and democratic governance for decades, remains unrecognized by any UN member state? The answer lies not in the inherent legitimacy of these regions' claims to statehood, but in the complex international system that determines which territories become countries. The modern international recognition system developed after World War II establishes parameters for statehood. According to the 1933 Montevideo Convention, a state should possess a permanent population, a defined territory, a government, and the capacity to enter relations with other states. Yet meeting these criteria provides no guarantee of recognition, as dozens of de facto independent regions have discovered. Despite approximately 60 active separatist movements worldwide and numerous self-governing territories, new country creation has become remarkably rare. Since South Sudan gained independence in 2011, no new widely recognized states have emerged, a significant slowdown compared to the post-Soviet period when over 20 new countries emerged in just a few years. The international recognition game resembles a complex chess match where having the right powerful players supporting your pieces determines victory more than how well you play. Dr. Elena Korosteleva, professor of international politics at the University of Kent, explains this dynamic. The international system has developed a strong bias toward maintaining existing borders. This status quo orientation creates a nearly insurmountable barrier for new states unless they receive support from major powers. This recognition challenge stems from competing principles in international law. The principle of self-determination suggests peoples have the right to determine their political status, while territorial integrity holds that existing borders should remain inviolable. These contradictory principles create a system where recognition decisions ultimately depend on politics rather than legal precedent. Kosovo illustrates this reality perfectly. Following the 1999 NATO intervention against Serbia and subsequent UN administration, Kosovo declared independence in 2008. The United States and most Western powers quickly recognized Kosovo, citing unique circumstances including systematic human rights abuses against Kosovo Albanians. Meanwhile, Russia, China, and numerous other countries rejected Kosovo's independence, arguing it violated Serbia's territorial integrity. Today, Kosovo remains partially recognized, a member of the World Bank and IMF, but unable to join the United Nations due to Russian and Chinese opposition. Transnistria offers a stark contrast to Kosovo's partial success. This breakaway region separated from Moldova following the Soviet Union's collapse and maintains de facto independence with its own government, currency, police, and military. Despite functioning independently since 1992 and meeting the basic Montevideo criteria, Transnistria remains universally unrecognized by UN member states. The critical difference between these cases is geopolitical patronage. Kosovo enjoys support from the United States and most European powers, while Transnistria relies solely on Russian backing. Similarly, Northern Cyprus, supported only by Turkey, and Somaliland, lacking any major power patron, remain internationally isolated despite decades of de facto independence. Understanding their disadvantage in this geopolitical chess game, separatist regions pursue extensive diplomatic strategies. First, they seek recognition from any willing UN member state, regardless of size. Somaliland has pursued recognition from smaller African nations, hoping initial recognition might create momentum for wider acceptance. Second, they seek membership in international organizations even without formal state recognition, as Kosovo achieved with certain sports federations and financial institutions. Third, separatist regions engage in paradiplomacy, establishing relationships with provinces or cities when state-level recognition proves impossible. Quebec maintains relationships with French regions and American states, despite remaining a Canadian province. Taiwan has developed city-to-city relationships throughout Asia as China restricts its formal diplomatic options. The paramount importance of major power support explains why separatist movements increasingly frame their causes to appeal to powerful states' interests. Kurdish forces in Syria emphasized their role fighting ISIS to gain American support. Taiwan positions itself as a democratic bulwark against authoritarian China to maintain U.S. backing. These strategic framings acknowledge that moral or legal arguments rarely succeed without alignment with major powers' interests. This creates glaring inconsistencies in recognition patterns. Western powers recognized Kosovo's independence from Serbia despite Serbian objections, citing unique circumstances. Yet these same powers universally rejected Russia's annexation of Crimea following a disputed referendum, despite Russia's claims about Crimean self-determination. Successful independence movements typically employ three key strategies. First, they secure a patron state with sufficient international influence. This patron provides diplomatic support, economic assistance, and sometimes military protection during the vulnerable transition period. Second, they conduct independence processes that appear legitimate to international observers, including referendums with clear majorities and commitments to human rights. Third, they demonstrate practical independence before seeking formal recognition by establishing functioning institutions and independent economic relationships. This challenging recognition landscape explains why many separatist movements have moderated their immediate goals from full independence to enhanced autonomy arrangements. Iraqi Kurdistan maintains independent control over most domestic affairs while technically remaining part of Iraq, avoiding the recognition barrier altogether. The sobering reality is that independence movements succeed primarily due to geopolitical support from major powers, not inherent legitimacy of their claims. This creates significant frustration within movements lacking powerful patrons, leading some to conclude that international recognition reflects a fundamentally uneven playing field rather than objective criteria. Democracy's double edge. Votes, referendums, and legitimacy. Can you vote your way to independence? Or does democracy sometimes prevent separation? This question sits at the heart of modern separatist politics, creating a fundamental tension between democratic principles and constitutional order. For regions seeking independence, referendums represent the clearest expression of democratic will. Yet parent nations often view these same votes as existential threats to their territorial integrity. When the British government agreed to Scotland's 2014 independence referendum, it established a precedent that many separatist movements have since cited. Prime Minister David Cameron, despite opposing Scottish independence, accepted that Scotland had the right to determine its future through democratic means. The resulting Edinburgh Agreement created a framework for a legally binding referendum, with both sides agreeing to respect the outcome. If they vote yes, Scotland becomes an independent country, Cameron stated before the vote. If they vote no, the UK stays together. This clarity provided the referendum with unquestioned legitimacy both domestically and internationally. The question appeared straightforward. Should Scotland be an independent country? With voters selecting yes or no. The 18-month campaign featured intense debate over economics, defence, EU membership, and national identity. On September 18, 2014, a remarkable 84.6% of eligible Scottish voters participated, demonstrating how deeply citizens cared about their constitutional future. The results: 55.3% voted against independence, while 44.7% supported it. Despite disappointment among independent supporters, the clear process and previous agreements meant the results gained immediate acceptance from both sides. Scottish independence leader Alex Salmond resigned following the defeat, but described the process as a triumph for democratic politics. The referendum's legitimacy stemmed from the mutual consent that established it. Both governments had agreed on the rules, question wording, and binding nature before campaigning began. Spain's approach to Catalonia provides a stark contrast. When the Catalan government announced plans for an independence referendum in 2017, Spain's constitutional court declared it illegal. The Spanish constitution declares the nation indivisible, with national sovereignty belonging to the Spanish people. From Madrid's perspective, a Catalan independence referendum violated this constitutional foundation. Catalonia proceeded despite court rulings, leading to police interventions at polling stations. These conflicting legitimacy claims, democratic expression versus constitutional order, created a crisis with no resolution mechanism. While organizers claimed 90% support for independence, the unauthorized nature and low turnout, 43%, allowed opponents to question its validity. Spain's approach created the worst possible outcome, argues political scientist Manuel Castells. By rejecting any legal path for Catalonia to express its democratic will, Spain transformed a political question into a constitutional crisis that benefited neither side. Taiwan reveals yet another dimension of this relationship. Taiwan's democratic system, established in the 1990s following decades of martial law, has transformed Taiwanese identity and its relationship with China. Through regular elections, Taiwan has developed democratic institutions that distinguish it from mainland China despite their shared cultural heritage. The 2024 Taiwanese presidential election, which saw Democratic Progressive Party candidate Lai Ching-te defeat opponents favoring closer ties with Beijing, demonstrated how democratic processes can affirm practical independence while avoiding formal declarations that might provoke conflict. Rather than holding an independence referendum that would trigger Chinese military response, Taiwan maintains its distinct political system through regular democratic processes that strengthen its separate identity. Democracy serves as Taiwan's primary legitimacy claim internationally, with its free elections and civil liberties contrasting with mainland China's authoritarian system. New Caledonia presents another variation on how democratic processes shape independence movements. The French territory has held 3 independence referendums under the 1998 Nouméa Accord. The most recent vote in 2021 rejected independence with 96.5% voting against, though independence supporters boycotted the referendum due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Despite the overwhelming margin, the boycott undermined the vote's perceived legitimacy among independence supporters. This highlights a crucial aspect. Perceived fairness matters as much as the actual voting mechanism. When significant segments view the process as illegitimate, even overwhelming majorities may fail to resolve the underlying conflict. Democratic processes create particular challenges for regions where the population remains deeply divided. In Northern Ireland, the Good Friday Agreement established that a united Ireland would require majority support in both Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. This acknowledges the complex identities within Northern Ireland, where approximately 42% identify as British, 25% as Irish, and 33% as Northern Irish. For regions with complex population distributions, democracy presents a challenge. What constitutes the appropriate voting unit? When Spain rejected Catalonia's right to vote separately, it implicitly claimed that all Spanish citizens, not just Catalans, should determine Catalonia's status. Similarly, China rejects Taiwan's separate democratic processes, arguing that Taiwan's future should be decided by all Chinese people. This fundamental disagreement about who constitutes the demos, the people entitled to vote on a particular question, lies at the heart of separatist conflicts, explains democratic theorist Robert Dahl. When the boundaries of the political community itself are contested, democracy alone cannot resolve the dispute. Democratic processes have both enabled and constrained independence movements. The contrasting approaches of the UK and Spain demonstrate how the framework surrounding democratic exercises proves as important as the votes themselves. When democratic legitimacy aligns with constitutional order, as in Scotland, even disappointed independence supporters generally accept the results. When these principles conflict, as in Catalonia, democratic expression can create crises rather than resolutions. Despite these challenges, democracy remains the primary mechanism through which separatist regions pursue legitimacy. Referendum results, even when they don't lead to independence, establish political facts that shape future negotiations. Scotland's 45% independence vote in 2014 demonstrated sufficient support to justify greater autonomy. Similarly, Quebec's narrow rejection of independence in 1995 led to significant constitutional accommodations despite the separatist defeat. The Taiwan question. A different kind of separation. What if Taiwan's unique situation offers insights into the future of separatism globally? Unlike Catalonia or Scotland, Taiwan functions as an independent country in nearly every practical sense. It has its own democratically elected government, military, currency, passport, and international trade relationships. Yet officially, most countries don't recognize Taiwan as a sovereign state. This unusual status makes Taiwan neither fully independent nor clearly subordinate to mainland China, creating a case study that challenges conventional understandings of separatism. Taiwan's story begins with the Chinese Civil War. When communist forces defeated the nationalist government in 1949, nationalist leader Chiang Kai-shek retreated to Taiwan with approximately 2 million followers. Both the communist government in Beijing and the nationalist government in Taipei claimed to be the legitimate rulers of all China. This wasn't initially a separatist movement, but rather two competing governments claiming the same territory. Over decades, this situation evolved into something more complex. Taiwan developed a distinct identity separate from mainland China, especially after democratic reforms in the 1980s and 1990s. Today, polling shows that most Taiwanese identify as either Taiwanese or both Taiwanese and Chinese, rather than solely Chinese, reflecting a significant shift in identity formation. This identity transformation is powerfully illustrated by Taipei resident Chen Weiting. When my parents were in school, they were taught they were Chinese citizens temporarily living on Taiwan until the mainland could be retaken. My generation grew up in a democracy with freedom of speech and religion. Our daily experiences have been completely different from people in China. That creates a distinct identity regardless of our shared cultural heritage. His testimony reveals how Taiwan's democratic experience has created an emotional and cultural divide that transcends historical connections. Beijing views the situation differently. China considers Taiwan a breakaway province that must eventually reunify with the mainland. Chinese leader Xi Jinping has stated that Taiwan must and will be reunited with China, refusing to rule out military force. China conducts military exercises near Taiwan, maintains hundreds of missiles aimed at the island, and works to isolate Taiwan internationally. The 2024 Taiwanese presidential election highlighted this complex relationship. Democratic Progressive Party candidate Lai Ching-te won despite Beijing's opposition to his party, which historically supported independence. During his campaign, Lai carefully avoided challenging the status quo, stating, "There is not such an independent route," and promising to maintain the existing situation rather than pushing for formal independence. This pragmatic approach reflects Taiwan's unusual position. Taiwan operates like a sophisticated clock mechanism. All the gears turn perfectly without official recognition of the timepiece itself. Unlike most separatist regions, Taiwan preserves practical autonomy while avoiding military conflict with China. This defensive posture distinguishes Taiwan from European separatist movements seeking to change their status. Meanwhile, daily life continues largely unaffected by these tensions. Taipei's skyline features modern skyscrapers, including the iconic Taipei 101. Streets buzz with scooters navigating between night markets, tech companies, and traditional temples. The island's economy ranks among the world's most advanced, particularly in semiconductor manufacturing, where Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company produces roughly 90% of the world's most advanced chips. This economic success strengthens Taiwan's practical independence. Major economies depend on Taiwanese technology, creating incentives to maintain economic relationships regardless of official diplomatic positions. Taiwan leverages these economic ties to maintain international space despite limited formal recognition. Dr. Chen Yifan, International Relations Professor at National Donghua University, explains, Taiwan has developed a pragmatic approach to international relations. When formal diplomatic recognition isn't possible, Taiwan pursues substantive relationships through trade offices, cultural exchanges, and participation in international organizations as Chinese Taipei or similar designations. This approach allows Taiwan to function internationally despite having formal diplomatic ties with only 13 countries. Taiwan's democratic institutions further differentiate it from mainland China. Its elections feature vibrant campaigns, free media coverage, and peaceful transfers of power between competing parties. Civil liberties are protected by an independent judiciary. These democratic characteristics provide Taiwan with moral legitimacy internationally, particularly with Western democracies. The Taiwanese approach offers several lessons for other separatist movements. First, Taiwan demonstrates the importance of developing functional institutions rather than focusing exclusively on formal recognition. By building effective governance, Taiwan made itself indispensable to the international community. Second, Taiwan shows how economic success can substitute for formal sovereignty. Taiwan's critical role in global supply chains ensures its continued participation in the international economy despite its ambiguous status. Third, Taiwan illustrates how identity formation often follows rather than precedes political separation. Taiwan's separate identity developed largely after political separation occurred, suggesting distinct political systems can eventually create distinct identities. Despite these insights, Taiwan's situation differs from European separatist movements. Taiwan maintains de facto independence with significant international support, particularly from the United States, while regions like Catalonia lack comparable external backing. Taiwan's geopolitical importance provides leverage that most separatist regions cannot match. Taiwan represents a distinct category within separatist politics, regions that already function independently but lack formal recognition. This model applies to only a handful of territories worldwide, making Taiwan's experience simultaneously instructive and exceptional. Some regions have achieved Taiwan's de facto independence without its economic success or democratic system. These frozen conflict zones maintain practical separation through different mechanisms, often involving external military support rather than economic leverage or democratic legitimacy. Frozen conflicts, Transnistria and de facto states. What happens when a region achieves independence in practice but remains unrecognized by the world? On a narrow strip of land between Ukraine and Moldova lies Transnistria, a territory that declared independence in 1990 but exists in a peculiar form of political purgatory. Despite having its own government, currency, police force, and even passport, not a single United Nations member recognizes Transnistria as a sovereign state. Transnistria embodies the classic frozen conflict zone, a ghost state that functions independently while remaining officially part of Moldova according to international law. For its approximately 470,000 residents, this creates a paradoxical existence in a place that both exists and doesn't exist depending on whose map you consult. The conflict originated during the Soviet Union's collapse when Moldova sought independence and stronger ties with neighboring Romania. The predominantly Russian-speaking population on the eastern bank of the Dniester River feared marginalization in a Romanian-oriented Moldova. These tensions escalated into armed conflict in 1992, resulting in approximately 1,000 deaths before Russian military intervention established the current dividing line. Living in a state of limbo since the 1992 ceasefire, Transnistria has operated as a de facto independent state. Its capital, Tiraspol, features broad Soviet-style boulevards lined with government buildings adorned with a hammer and sickle emblem long abandoned elsewhere. The Transnistrian Supreme Soviet conducts regular sessions, passing laws that apply only within this unrecognized territory. Perhaps nothing symbolizes Transnistria's determination to function as a normal state more than its unique currency, the Transnistrian ruble. These plastic coins, the only polymer coinage in Europe, feature portraits of local heroes and historic figures. For residents, these colorful rubles represent daily economic life, usable at local shops and ATMs, but requiring exchange when crossing into Moldova or Ukraine, a tangible reminder of their isolated status. This de facto independence relies heavily on external support, particularly from Russia. Approximately 1,500 Russian troops remain stationed in Transnistria, officially as peacekeepers but functionally serving as guarantors of Transnistria's separation from Moldova. Russian support extends to economic subsidies, with Gazprom providing natural gas at heavily discounted rates while Russian companies maintain significant investments in the region. Transnistria exists in its current form primarily because Russia wants it to, explains Moldovan political analyst Vlad Kolminsky. Without Russian troops and subsidies, the economic and security foundations of this separatist entity would collapse quickly. The paradox of everyday life internally, the government structure maintains distinctly Soviet characteristics, with power concentrated in President Vadim Krasnoselsky's hands. Sheriff, a conglomerate founded by former security officials, dominates the private sector, controlling everything from supermarkets to the football club that famously defeated Real Madrid in 2021. Despite functioning institutions, unrecognized status imposes severe limitations on residents' lives. Transnistrian passports hold no international validity, forcing residents to seek Moldovan, Russian, or Ukrainian citizenship to travel abroad. Many hold multiple passports, switching between documents depending on their destination, a pragmatic adaptation to their limbo state. Navigating economic isolation for businesses and workers. Economic isolation presents constant challenges. Without international recognition, Transnistrian firms cannot legally export directly to global markets. Instead, they must register with Moldovan authorities and export through Moldova, creating administrative hurdles and reducing competitiveness. Banking operates outside the international financial system, making conventional transfers impossible. Money reaches Transnistria through Russian banks or informal channels, complicating business operations. The territory's ambiguous legal status creates uncertainty regarding property rights, deterring potential investors despite low labor costs. Perhaps most significantly, unrecognized status creates perpetual uncertainty about Transnistria's future. Without international legitimacy, property purchases, business investments, and educational qualifications exist in a legal gray zone that could theoretically be invalidated if Moldova reasserted control. A post-Soviet pattern Transnistria isn't unique in this regard. Similar frozen conflicts exist elsewhere in the post-Soviet space. Abkhazia and South Ossetia broke away from Georgia with Russian support, while the Donetsk and Luhansk regions in eastern Ukraine operated as unrecognized entities before Russia formally annexed them in 2022. Evidence suggests frozen conflicts can persist for decades. Cyprus remains divided since 1974, demonstrating how such arrangements can calcify into seemingly permanent divisions. The sustainability of these arrangements depends primarily on continued external support. When this support wavers, frozen conflicts can quickly unfreeze in unpredictable ways. Georgia's attempt to reassert control over South Ossetia in 2008 prompted Russian military intervention that solidified the breakaway region's separation. Similarly, Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine dramatically altered the status of separatist regions, demonstrating how quickly frozen conflicts can transform into active hostilities. For residents caught in these political limbo zones, daily life continues despite limitations. Children attend schools, patients visit hospitals, and families celebrate holidays within systems that function independently from their parent states. These practical realities create attachments to separatist institutions regardless of international status, generating distinct identities that further complicate potential reunification. The frozen conflict model represents a distinctly post-Soviet approach to territorial disputes, maintaining deliberately ambiguous arrangements that serve various geopolitical interests while creating stability in the short term but perpetuating underlying conflicts indefinitely. The question remains, what would actual successful independence look like? If regions like Transnistria represent incomplete separation, functioning practically but lacking international legitimacy, how would a successful transition to full independence proceed? The practical challenges facing newly independent countries extend far beyond the initial separation, creating complex transitions that separatist movements rarely address in detail before transitions. What if Catalonia had declared independence and made it stick? What would the first year look like? While independence movements focus on achieving separation, they rarely address the complex practicalities that follow a successful declaration. The day after independence introduces challenges that require immediate solutions but often receive little planning during the campaign phase. Imagine waking up in Barcelona the morning after independence. The Catalan celebrations still echo through the streets, but at the newly established border with Spain, confusion reigns. Where once travelers flowed freely, makeshift checkpoints create bottlenecks along the 360-kilometer boundary. Border control, a basic requirement of statehood, requires immediate implementation despite no existing infrastructure. Catalan officials, hastily appointed as border agents, struggle with unfamiliar customs procedures while travelers wait in growing lines. This border scene represents one glimpse of a complex transition period. Inside government buildings across Catalonia, officials face three urgent questions demanding immediate answers. Which currency will fill wallets tomorrow? Which laws govern disputes tonight? Which international agreements allow planes to land, mail to arrive, and goods to cross borders? In shops and banks throughout Catalonia, currency questions create immediate practical problems. If Catalonia continues using the euro, it needs European Central Bank approval or must proceed without official support. Creating a new Catalan currency offers sovereignty but risks immediate value loss. Citizens might watch their savings diminish overnight as international markets evaluate the new currency. Shop owners face the daunting task of repricing every item while banks scramble to convert accounts and establish exchange systems. Legal uncertainty pervades everyday life during transition. A Catalan judge facing her first post-independence case must decide which laws apply. Most separatist regions maintain existing legal frameworks initially, gradually replacing them with new legislation. Northern Macedonia followed this approach after splitting from Yugoslavia in 1991, applying Yugoslav law for years until sufficient Macedonian legislation existed. Meanwhile, ordinary Catalans wonder about the status of their property rights, contracts, and professional licenses in this legal limbo. International relationships present perhaps the most visible disruption. A Catalan farmer who previously shipped produce throughout Europe now finds his goods stopped at borders, lacking the necessary certifications. Aviation authorities question whether Barcelona's airport maintains proper clearances for international flights. These disruptions occur because international agreements signed by Spain don't automatically transfer to newly independent Catalonia. Richard Collins, international law professor, explains, countries like Scotland or Catalonia would need to renegotiate thousands of international agreements governing everything from aviation rights to fisheries management. These negotiations take years to complete, creating significant uncertainty during transition. Diplomatic recognition forms the foundation for addressing these challenges. Without recognition from key partners, Catalonia struggles to establish formal relationships necessary for normal functioning. Government institutions transform overnight as civil service systems, tax collection agencies, and regulatory bodies continue operating while adapting to new authorities. Security arrangements demand immediate attention. Police officers patrolling Barcelona streets must determine their new chain of command. National defense becomes an immediate concern. Does Catalonia establish military forces from scratch or convert regional police? When Slovenia declared independence from Yugoslavia, it transformed its territorial defense forces into a national military overnight. But these forces initially lacked heavy weapons, air defense capabilities, and proper command structures. The human dimension of independence emerges through population movements. Some Spanish nationals in Catalonia might return to Spain, while Catalans working abroad might return home. This creates logistical challenges for housing and employment systems. Citizenship determination becomes personal and immediate. Who automatically receives Catalan citizenship, and what options exist for others? Economic life transforms during transition. A business owner in Girona watches investment decisions freeze as international partners assess the new political reality. Trade relationships face disruption as new procedures replace established patterns. When Czechoslovakia separated into Czech Republic and Slovakia in 1993, their initial currency union collapsed within weeks due to market speculation, demonstrating how economic forces can overwhelm careful political planning. Public services continue despite administrative challenges. A patient entering a Barcelona hospital wonders whether her medical records remain accessible and her healthcare coverage valid. Teachers question which curriculum they should teach. These services must continue without interruption while transferring administrative systems from Spanish to Catalan control. For citizens who opposed independence, transition brings particular anxiety. Every separatist region contains populations who identify strongly with the former state. Their status and rights following independence shape both international legitimacy and internal stability for newly independent Catalonia. Successful transitions typically share several characteristics: extensive pre-independence planning, transitional arrangements with a former parent state, and international support. When these elements align, new states navigate transition periods with minimal disruption. When absent, independence leads to institutional weakness and economic difficulty. The gap between independence aspirations and the complex reality of state building often surprises both leaders and citizens of new countries. While these challenges don't make independence impossible, they require detailed planning and realistic expectations about the difficulties involved in creating a new state from an existing region. The other side: parent nations and containment strategies. How do nations like Spain, China, and the UK work to prevent their territories from breaking away? For every separatist movement we've explored, there exists a central government working diligently to maintain territorial integrity. These parent nations employ various strategies ranging from dialogue to force, with most falling somewhere in between these extremes. Spain's approach to Catalonia demonstrates how containment strategies evolve over time. When Catalonia held its unauthorized independence referendum in October 2017, the Spanish government under Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy responded with direct police intervention. Spanish National Police seized ballot boxes, removed voters from polling stations, and used batons and rubber bullets against civilians. This heavy-handed approach aimed to physically prevent the vote, but backfired by creating sympathetic images of injured voters that strengthened separatist resolve. Following the referendum, Spain employed constitutional powers to suspend Catalonia's autonomy. Article 155 of the Spanish Constitution allowed Madrid to dismiss the Catalan government, dissolve its parliament, and take direct control of the region's institutions. The judicial system became Spain's next tool, with courts charging Catalan leaders with sedition and misuse of public funds. 9 leaders received prison sentences while others fled Spain to avoid prosecution, a strategy that functioned like a chess player sacrificing pieces to protect the king. Spain's approach transformed significantly after Pedro Sánchez became Prime Minister in 2018. His socialist government pursued dialogue rather than confrontation, meeting with Catalan authorities to discuss increased funding and greater regional powers. This approach culminated in pardons for imprisoned separatist leaders in 2021 and an amnesty law in 2024. This evolution from crackdowns to amnesty illustrates the delicate balancing act central governments navigate, much like a tightrope walker adjusting their position with each gust of wind. Spain discovered that dialogue combined with legal boundaries proved more effective than repression, reducing separatist fervor while maintaining territorial integrity. The United Kingdom chose a markedly different containment strategy for Scottish independence. Rather than declaring referendums illegal, the UK government negotiated the 2014 Edinburgh Agreement, establishing a legal framework for Scotland's vote. By granting a referendum, the UK government wagered that Scots would reject independence, a calculated gamble that paid off when 55.3% voted to remain. Throughout the campaign, the British government mobilised resources to advocate against independence, with cabinet ministers visiting Scotland, government departments producing economic analyses, and emotional appeals to shared history. This approach of permitting a vote while campaigning against independence allowed the UK to claim democratic legitimacy while maintaining territorial integrity. Following the referendum, the UK implemented significant devolution of powers to the Scottish Parliament, addressing grievances that had fueled independence sentiment. When Scottish nationalists later sought a second referendum after Brexit, the UK government refused, arguing the 2014 vote had settled the question. The UK's strategy resembled a parent allowing a teenager temporary freedom within established boundaries, acknowledging the desire for independence while maintaining ultimate authority. China's approach to Taiwan represents a third containment strategy, combining military threats, economic incentives, and international isolation. Military pressure forms the most visible aspect, with the People's Liberation Army conducting exercises near Taiwan and aircraft entering Taiwan's air defense zone. These actions serve as constant reminders of potential consequences should Taiwan declare formal independence, functioning like a player showing strength cards in a high-stakes poker game. Alongside these threats, China offers economic incentives for closer integration. Preferential policies for Taiwanese businesses, educational opportunities for students, and simplified procedures for professionals create economic dependency that raises the cost of separation. These economic links have created a significant constituency within Taiwan that prioritizes stable cross-strait relations over independence. China's most effective strategy involves isolating Taiwan diplomatically. Through economic pressure and diplomatic incentives, China has reduced the number of countries formally recognizing Taiwan from 22 in 2000 to just 13 today. China also blocks Taiwan's participation in international organizations, limiting its presence to informal or observer status. This isolation restricts Taiwan's ability to build diplomatic relationships necessary for successful independence, essentially cutting off potential alliances before they can form. Beyond these specific cases, parent nations employ several general containment strategies. Decentralization and autonomy arrangements grant separatist regions significant self-governance while maintaining the overarching state structure. Belgium's transformation into a federal state with substantial language community autonomy effectively diffused much separatist sentiment in Flanders. Fiscal transfers often accompany these arrangements, with governments providing financial benefits to potentially separatist regions. Cultural recognition provides another containment tool. When parent nations acknowledge, protect, and promote minority languages and cultural expressions, they remove key grievances that fuel separatist movements. Canada's official bilingualism policy addresses one of Quebec's core concerns about cultural preservation within the Federation. These varied approaches reveal that parent nations strategically respond to contain independence movements through combinations of dialogue, concessions, legal constraints, and occasionally force. The most effective strategies typically combine firm constitutional boundaries with genuine accommodation of regional distinctiveness, creating conditions where regions can express their identities without full separation. As we've seen throughout this journey, separatism ultimately comes down to human psychology, our need to belong to communities with shared identity while simultaneously controlling our collective destiny. Both separatist movements and parent nations appeal to these fundamental psychological drives through their competing narratives about national identity and self-determination. Independence movements expose a core tension in our world. rigid borders versus evolving identities. The post-World War II international system established mostly fixed boundaries, yet people's sense of who they are continues to shift and develop within these lines. This tension creates ongoing pressure points across the globe. From Catalonia to Scotland, Taiwan to Kurdistan, these movements persist regardless of their success in achieving statehood. Every independence movement represents historical grievances, cultural preservation, economic calculations, and human desires for self-governance. As we've seen through history, culture, economics, and geopolitics, these identity questions continuously reshape our world. The question remains: can our international system adapt to these evolving identities?